Hey, welcome to Home Video Hangouts. I'm Cody. I just saw the new movie Godzilla Kong, The New Empire, and today I'm going to be giving you my ranking of all of the movies in the Monsterverse. These are all fun movies to watch that have great visuals and great special effects, but I think some of the movies in the series are better than others, and they all have things that could be improved. So we're going to dive right into the ranking, but also stay tuned to the end of the video to hear what I have to say about the Apple TV series Monarch and how I believe that fits into this ranking as well. So at the number 5 spot, I put the movie Godzilla. How I would describe this movie is it's an appetizer for what's coming next in the series. So what I really enjoyed about this movie was it introduced Godzilla to this franchise very well. The limited amount of action sequences that were in this movie showcased Godzilla as an awesome looking creature, and there are some great special effects, and everything from the lighting to the way this was filmed was really cool in terms of introducing Godzilla. Also, they chose a great cast of characters for this movie, and I think that they kind of incorporated this movie really well into the franchise by making it kind of Godzilla's origin story and kind of showcasing the havoc that Godzilla can wreak on a city and all the destruction that goes along with wherever Godzilla is. And I think that, looking back on this movie now, it really shines as an introduction of Godzilla into the whole franchise. With that being said, though, the reason I ranked this one number 5 is I didn't find this one as compelling as the rest of the movies in the series, and one of the main reasons for that was this one really held back on the action sequences, and I think a lot of people going into any of the movies in this whole franchise are wanting to see that really intense CGI monster action, and this delivered on some of that, but it had a really interesting thing it did where whenever we'd see Godzilla on screen earlier in the movie, it was like we were about to have an intense action scene, but then it got cut short. It would kind of close off the scene and make it seem like you're like watching it from around the corner with the camera angles they used. And it was a very strange thing to do. And I believe part of why they did that is to kind of lead up to the end of the movie for a big payoff at the end. But unfortunately, that took away from the movie quite a bit for me. And I think they really could have done better with the action earlier on in the first part of the movie. I also think this movie is a little bit longer than it needed to be, and it wasn't paced well. When we look at the more modern films in this franchise, they're very action-packed, very fast-paced. It's an edge-of-your-seat kind of movie. And with this one, it was a little more dull than that. It was very dark, it was paced a little bit slower, and the focus was more on introducing Godzilla than really showing what Godzilla was capable of. Now, next in the number 4 spot, I put Kong Skull Island. And what I would say about this movie is it acted as a origin story for Kong, essentially, but it did so in a much better way than what we saw in Godzilla's origin story. So what I mean by that is, in the Godzilla movie that I just discussed, we just kind of see, Godzilla terrorizing a city, and it's kind of what you expect, whereas with Kong, we see this kind of adventure take place where new characters are introduced. They go on an adventure to Skull Island to capture Kong, essentially, and that kind of makes for a compelling adventure in itself, just going to Skull Island, kind of like what we saw in King Kong that came out earlier, which is unrelated to this Monsterverse. And I would say that, while this didn't have some of the humor that we saw in the King Kong movie, which is very different, this movie really introduced Kong well and introduced core elements to the franchise that we're still seeing in the latest releases. And so I really appreciated that about this. It really kind of developed Kong as not just another monster, but it introduced Kong as a pivotal character in this whole franchise. This movie also had a really unique filming style that almost made this film seem like a historical piece, where they used kind of different types of camera footage to make it seem like one, that they are on an adventure, exploring Skull Island, but also that it was like kind of like historical archive footage, and that was really cool how they did that. And I appreciated kind of the difference in filming style they used for this one that gave it a different feel. And that's, again, part of what made this more of a compelling origin story for Kong compared to what we saw with Godzilla. And then, of course, we do have a top-tier cast here. I was really impressed with the cast they chose for this movie, and the cast executed their roles pretty well. And this one upped the ante a little bit with the action sequences between the monsters. I think the Skull Island setting presented some unique opportunities to introduce other types of creatures, so I appreciated all of that about this movie. Now, in terms of what could have been improved here and why this is only in the number 4 spot is, while I enjoyed the setting and the plot, there was still some aspects of the movie that were paced kind of slow or slower than they needed to be. And there was also something interesting they did with the characters here, where they had a great cast and they kind of developed stories for these characters that the cast were playing, but they also killed off a lot of the cast very quickly, and we see multiple characters get built up and then just killed off, and then they're not really acknowledged as much again. And then there's certain characters that get killed off in a really intense or brutal way, and it's not acknowledged a whole lot. And so that was just kind of a strange style they took for this movie, and it took away from kind of the development of the overall franchise, I think, in terms of the human characters. And I've seen that be a reoccurring theme with this whole franchise, is that we don't see any human characters get developed really strongly in all of this franchise. Most of the focus is on the creatures and the monsters, which is fine because that's what most people are watching this for, is that action. But at the same time, we could have a much deeper, compelling universe here if there was better development of the human characters. So while I enjoyed Kong Skull Island and its unique filming style, I think that it's difficult for this one to compare to future movies in the franchise, just because it doesn't quite have that same level of action. It doesn't really incorporate both Godzilla and Kong in a meaningful way yet, and it's missing a lot of meaningful development of human characters. All right, in the number 3 spot, I have Godzilla King of Monsters. And what I enjoyed about this one is this is the movie where the franchise starts to take a turn and kind of incorporate a lot of elements into one movie. This is a movie where we get a better picture of who Godzilla is, what Godzilla is capable of, and again, they introduce new characters, and they aren't super effective in how they develop these characters in this movie, and a lot of the drama between the human characters isn't the greatest here, but it really stands out what they did with Godzilla in this movie and some of the modern effects they used. And as we see all these movies progress, this movie was a turning point in special effects and visuals, and really showing what Godzilla is capable of. So I really appreciate this movie specifically for that turning point in the series. This is also the film where we really got introduced to a lot more creatures from the universe's mythology. I know that people watching this series really want to see lots of monster battles, get introduced to lots of crazy creatures, and that's what kind of keeps this franchise going forward, and this is where they definitely upped the ante with that type of action, and that's why we have some really awesome releases in the past few years, is because this movie went in that direction. This movie also had a very dark setting, which helps some of the glowing, vibrant visuals really stand out, and that makes for a great 4K release of this movie as well. And so I've watched this multiple times, in the theater, at home, and every time I watch it, I'm very impressed by all the visuals here as well as the soundtrack. So everything that I would say is wrong with this movie revolves around the human characters. And again, that's sort of a recurring theme with this whole franchise, but it's especially apparent here. The drama in this movie is very cheesy. Any humor is very cheesy. While they have some great cast, again, in this movie, it's just hard to really care about the drama they're going through with each other. It just seems to kind of distract from what people really care about, which is Godzilla and the monsters and creatures in this movie. And it just seems like these movies are put together with a ton of budget for the CGI and the action of the creatures, and then they get a great cast, and then the plot for the human characters just kind of thrown together after. And so that took away from this movie a little bit. But I still enjoyed what this movie came to be overall, and it really shows a turning point in the series towards what's coming next. And lastly, this movie, as with multiple other in the series, very much ignores the consequences of the characters' actions, especially the human characters, and it's kind of just overlooked how much damage is caused by Godzilla and the other creatures and the consequences of the characters' actions. And, you know, some people have a problem with that. I think if you look at this movie just for enjoying what it looks like in the action, that's great and you'll enjoy it. But then if you care about any part of the plot and the development of the characters and the consequences of the characters and how they're portrayed, you may have an issue with that, with how they portray the characters here. Alright, and then in the number 2 spot, I put Godzilla vs. Kong. Now, this is probably one of the most important movies in this entire franchise because this movie is a major payoff that fans of the franchise are waiting for years. We knew early on that this was eventually going to happen, that they were going to hit Godzilla and Kong against each other in the same way that we saw things like Batman vs. Superman and various other movies, you know, Freddy vs. Jason, you know, all these other movies where you take two major characters in a franchise and pit them together for an intense action movie. We knew this was coming, and this movie executed it very well. As I mentioned, the last movie in the series was kind of a turning point, and I think this one gave us the payoff that we were looking for those really intense scenes between Kong and Godzilla. And it again sets up what's coming next in the franchise and gives something really awesome to even expand on with the next installment in the franchise. So what I really enjoyed specifically was that everything really revolved around this battle and led up to this big battle. And we get more of an understanding here of the franchise's mythology as a whole, like Hollow Earth and things like that. And that's something that we kind of needed here with how the aspect of development of the whole world in previous movies was kind of weak, with how weak the characters' roles were. I think this really helped what they did in this movie to develop the mythology and everything further. And we could see that with every movie they're increasing how intense the action is, in the same way that we've seen with other series like maybe like Fast and Furious, Transformers, certain other high action movies where each sequel gets more of a budget or allocation of intense action, and I appreciated that about this movie. Now, with that being said, there is somewhat of a lack of cohesiveness in the plot here, and there are a lot of unanswered questions that get brought up, and some of these questions will get answered later in the franchise, you know, whether it be through the Monarch TV series or in the upcoming movie, The New Empire. And so I think, you know, if you at the time watch this movie, it would leave you thinking like, you know, how is all this possible? They're really going for a lot of fantasy here with a lot of unanswered questions, and that'll bother some people. Some people won't care, but that was one thing I'd say that could have been improved here, is they could have expanded even more on the universe as a whole and gave further explanations to things. But you're also limited on what you can do in a movie, so I think that's why they ultimately decided to make the Monarch series as well later. Now, in the number 1 spot, I have Godzilla Kong, The New Empire, and this is my favorite movie in the series now, just because of how they took what worked well in all the previous movies and just amped it up even more so in this one. In my opinion, this movie had, again, a compelling cast, even if their characters weren't executed well. I think the cast was overall good because it incorporated cast from a lot of different previous movies in the franchise, and the pacing was just perfect. The amount of action was incredible here. The visuals were incredible. The audio was incredible. And if you look at this movie solely with what they did with the primary creatures, Kong, Godzilla, and then the new creatures that are introduced, I think what they do with the different ways that those creatures are pulled into the plot is really compelling. Again, you have to kind of ignore what the human characters are doing because they never do a good job with the human characters. But if you focus on the monsters and the creatures specifically, they do an awesome job with that. This movie also almost has the feel of something like Avatar, where you're kind of going on to an adventure in a new world with this one as we further explore Hollow Earth and what that means for the franchise, and I enjoyed that part of it. I wouldn't say it was the same level of adventure that we saw with Skull Island maybe, but it was still something really compelling and gave some great opportunities for more vibrant visuals and just added a new element to the movie. On the negative side of this movie though, it still had terrible humor, not the best acting, and it didn't tie in to the Monarch series as much as I was hoping it would. But with that being said, the main focus on here was new twists on the creatures and the action, and that was what I wanted to see anyway. I saw this movie in IMAX, which was just incredible and made me appreciate all of the action so much more. So as with all the rest of the series, the main focus here is the action. Human characters could have been better, and that's just kind of what we see over and over again with this whole franchise, but this one executed on the action sequences so well that I'm giving it the #1 spot. So that was my ranking of all 5 of the current movies in the franchise. With that being said though, as promised earlier, I wanted to share my thoughts on the Monarch TV series and how that plays into this ranking. If I were to rank Monarch as well as these movies, I would probably put Monarch in the 6th spot, because while I appreciated what that series did to explain the history of this cinematic universe further and explore the mythology more, they didn't really incorporate characters from that series into the latest movie or tie it into the latest movie that much, and Monarch was lacking a lot of the intense action that we see in the movies and focused more on character development and history of the universe stuff. So it was very different than what we come to expect from the movies, and some of that was a breath of fresh air, some of it was a little bit disappointing. So I appreciate that they did a series for this franchise, but I definitely wouldn't rank it above any of these movies. So that's my thought on Monarch, and let me know in the comments below what your thought is on all these movies and on Monarch and what your ranking is. And if you enjoyed my perspective here, hit the like button down below and the subscribe button, and make sure you keep an eye on my channel for my future ranking videos and movie reviews, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.